Welcome to another interesting episode of Melbourne, Victoria. The capital of the Australian state of Victoria and the second most populous city in Australia, after Sydney, although the most populous by contiguous urban area. Please subscribe to this channel and share this video to everybody. Its name generally refers to a 9,993 square kilometers, 3,858 square miles, metropolitan area known as Greater Melbourne, comprising an urban agglomeration of 31 local municipalities, although the name is also used specifically for the local municipality of City of Melbourne based around its central business area. The metropolis occupies much of the northern and eastern coastlines of Port Phillip Bay and spreads into the Mornington Peninsula, part of West Gippsland, as well as the hinterlands towards the Yarra Valley, the Dandenong Ranges, and the Macedon Ranges. Melbourne has a population over 5 million, 19% of the population of Australia, as of the 2021 census, mostly residing to the east of the city centre, and its inhabitants are commonly referred to as Melburnians. The area of Melbourne has been home to Aboriginal Victorians for over 40,000 years and serves as an important meeting place for local Kulin Nation clans. Of the 5 peoples of the Kulin Nation, the traditional custodians of the land encompassing Melbourne are the Bunwurrung, Wathaurong, and the Wurundjeri peoples. A short-lived penal settlement was built in 1803 at Port Phillip, then part of the British colony of New South Wales. However, it was not until 1835, with the arrival of free settlers from Van Diemen's Land, modern-day Tasmania, that Melbourne was founded. It was incorporated as a Crown settlement in 1837 and named after the then British Prime Minister, William Lamb, 2nd Viscount Melbourne. In 1851, for years after Queen Victoria declared it a city, Melbourne became the capital of the new colony of Victoria. During the 1850s Victorian Gold Rush, the city entered a lengthy boom period that, by the late 1880s, had transformed it into one of the world's largest and wealthiest metropolises. After the Federation of Australia in 1901, Melbourne served as the interim seat of government of the new nation until Canberra became the permanent capital in 1927. Today, it is a leading financial centre in the Asia-Pacific region and ranked 32nd globally in the March 2022 Global Financial Centres Index. Melbourne is home of many of Australia's best-known landmarks, such as the Melbourne Cricket Ground, the National Gallery of Victoria and the World Heritage-listed Royal Exhibition Building. Noted for its cultural heritage, the city gave rise to Australian rules football, Australian Impressionism and Australian cinema, and has more recently been recognised as a UNESCO City of Literature and a global centre for street art, live music and theatre. It hosts major annual international events, such as the Australian Grand Prix and the Australian Open, and also hosted the 1956 Summer Olympics. Melbourne consistently ranked as the world's most livable city for much of the 2010s. Melbourne Airport, also known as the Tullamarine Airport, is the second busiest airport in Australia, and the Port of Melbourne is the nation's busiest seaport. Its main metropolitan rail terminus is Flinders Street Station and its main regional rail and road coach terminus is Southern Cross Station. It also has Australia's most extensive freeway network and the largest urban tram network in the world. Aboriginal Australians have lived in the Melbourne area for at least 40,000 years. When European colonisers arrived in the 19th century, at least 20,000 Kulin people from 3 distinct language groups, the Wurundjeri, Bunwurrung and Wathaurong, resided in the area. It was an important meeting place for the clans of the Kulin Nation Alliance and a vital source of food and water. In June 2021, The boundaries between the land of two of the traditional owner groups, the Wurundjeri and Bunurong, were agreed after being drawn up by the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council. The borderline runs across the city from west to east, with the CBD, Richmond and Hawthorne included in Wurundjeri land, and Albert Park, St Kilda and Caulfield on Bunurong land. However, this change in boundaries is still disputed by people on both sides of the dispute, including Narwhal Carolyn Briggs. The name Narm is commonly used by the broader Aboriginal community to refer to the city, stemming from the traditional name recorded for the area on which the Melbourne city centre is built. The word is closely related to Narm Narm, being the Bunwurrung word for Port Phillip Bay. Narm means scrub in Eastern Kulin languages, which reflects the creation story of how the bay was filled by the creation of the Birrarung, Yarra River. Before this, the dry Melbourne region extended out into the bay, and the bay was filled with tea tree scrub where boardmull, emu, and marram, kangaroo, were hunted. The first British settlement in Victoria, then part of the penal colony of New South Wales, was established by Colonel David Collins in October 1803, at Sullivan Bay, near present-day Sorrento. The following year, due to a perceived lack of resources, these settlers relocated to Van Diemen's Land, present-day Tasmania, and founded the city of Hobart. It would be 30 years before another settlement was attempted. In May and June 1835, John Batman, a leading member of the Port Phillip Association in Van Diemen's Land, explored the Melbourne area, and later claimed to have negotiated a purchase of 2,400 square kilometers, 600,000 acres, with 8 Wurundjeri elders. However, the nature of the treaty has been heavily disputed, as none of the parties spoke the same language, and the elders likely perceived it as part of the gift exchanges which had taken place over the previous few days, amounting to a Tandarum ceremony which allows temporary, not permanent, access to and use of the land. Batman selected a site on the northern bank of the Yarra River, declaring that this will be the place for a village, before returning to Van Diemen's Land. In August 1835, another group of Vandemonian settlers arrived in the area and established a settlement at the site of the current Melbourne Immigration Museum. Batman and his group arrived the following month, and the two groups ultimately agreed to share the settlement, initially known by the native name of Duatigala. Batman's treaty with the Aboriginal elders was annulled by Richard Bourke, the Governor of New South Wales, who at the time governed all of eastern mainland Australia, with compensation paid to members of the association. In 1836, Bourke declared the city the administrative capital of the Port Phillip district of New South Wales, and commissioned the first plan for its urban layout, the Hoddle Grid, in 1837. Known briefly as Batmania, the settlement was named Melbourne on April 10, 1837 by Governor Richard Bourke after the British Prime Minister, William Lamb, 2nd Viscount Melbourne, whose seat was Melbourne Hall in the market town of Melbourne, Derbyshire. That year, the settlement's General Post Office officially opened with that name. Between 1836 and 1842, Victorian Aboriginal groups were largely dispossessed of their land by European settlers. By January 1844, there were said to be 675 Aboriginal people resident in squalid camps in Melbourne. The British Colonial Office appointed 5 Aboriginal protectors for the Aboriginal people of Victoria in 1839. However, their work was nullified by a land policy that favored squatters who took possession of Aboriginal lands. By 1845, fewer than 240 wealthy Europeans held all the pastoral licenses then issued in Victoria and became a powerful political and economic force in Victoria for generations to come. Letters Patent of Queen Victoria, issued on June 25, 1847, declared Melbourne a city. On July 1, 1851, the Port Phillip district separated from New South Wales to become the colony of Victoria, with Melbourne as its capital. Please subscribe to this channel.